The inspection demand arrived on a Tuesday, which I mention only because Tuesdays at Kethren 4 are slow. Cargo transit runs thin on Tuesdays. The big haulers come through on Mondays and Thursdays, and by Tuesday morning the docking arms are mostly empty, and the ops floor smells like cooling coffee and reprocessed air, and the particular silence that settles over a station when nothing is moving through it. It is not the kind of day anything important is supposed to happen. I was on my second cup and midway through a routine maintenance clearance backlog when Senior Liaison Aldrich Van came down the corridor with the look he gets when something has landed in his queue that he would prefer to pass to someone else. I recognized the look because Van had given it to me twice before. Once when the Sovhari Grain Consortium complained about our docking queue prioritization, and once when a Sovhari cargo captain filed a customs protest at 200 on a Friday night. Both times the look had preceded the words, "Vasquez, you've read," followed by the name of whatever document the situation required. "Vasquez," he said. "Morning, sir." Sovhari delegation just cleared the docking arm. He set a data chip on the console in front of me. They filed a compact disclosure demand 30 minutes ago, Article 9 of the Kethren Transit Compact, full operational disclosure request. 3 days of inspection sessions, access to our transit logs, manifest records, and what they're calling capability documentation. We have until Friday close. I picked up the chip. Who's handling it? He looked at me in the way that answered the question. Right, I said. Who else is available? Commander Os has the Sovhari rerouting talks through Friday and has made it clear he is not to be interrupted unless the station is on fire, and even then he wants a second opinion. Sub-Liaison Chu is on medical leave through next week. I've got the Central Corridor review on my plate through Thursday. He paused. You've read the compact. I had read the compact. I had read it because 6 months ago I'd been on a night shift with nothing moving through the corridor and nothing in the queue, and the compact had been sitting in the station's reference archive since the last inspection 2 years before, and it was the longest document I hadn't read. I'd gone through it the way you go through something when you have nowhere to be, slowly, page by page, all the footnotes and annexes and subsection clarifications, the whole machine of it. The full thing? Van asked. Cover to cover, I said, including the annexes. He nodded once, as if confirming a suspicion he'd had since he picked up his coffee that morning. Then you're the liaison. The delegation lead is a senior inspector named Vel Sauron. Credentials are on the chip. They've requested the main inspection suite. I've cleared it Wednesday through Friday. You'll have specialist Tomas Reyes from Records and analyst Preeti Anand from Transit Ops. Whatever they ask for, you produce it same day. This is a routine compliance inspection, Vasquez. Give them everything they want. Don't make it complicated. Yes, sir. He left. I sat with the chip in my hand for a moment. Then I went back to the compact. I had already read it once, but a document reads differently when you know what you're looking for. The first time through, Article 14 had registered as interesting in a theoretical way. A symmetry provision, carefully worded, clearly added by someone who understood the value of formal reciprocity, even if they never expected to need it. The second time, with a Sovhari delegation 2 hours from docking, it read differently. The Kethren Transit Compact was not, technically, a document designed to embarrass anyone. It had been drafted 42 years ago as a framework for what the Sovhari called capability transparency, a formal mechanism by which species operating in shared transit corridors could inspect each other's operational records to verify that no one was concealing military assets, fleet movements, or weapons technology in the vicinity of civilian shipping lanes. In principle, it was reasonable. In practice, it was almost always invoked by one party against another when the first party suspected the second of hiding something specific, or when a political season at home made a demonstration of interspecies oversight useful. Or, and I had come to suspect this, was the Kethren 4 case. When a delegation needed to be seen doing something productive in a region they considered low priority. The Sovhari had invoked Article 9 against human waystation operations exactly 3 times in the previous decade. Each time, the inspection produced nothing that interested them. The report characterized human capabilities as adequate-marginal, and the delegation went home. I read Article 9 again. It was 4 pages of procedure, how a demand was filed, what documentation it required, what the inspecting party was entitled to request, what timelines applied. It was thorough and a little self-congratulatory in its precision, the way legal instruments sometimes are when the people who wrote them were proud of how many contingencies they'd anticipated. Then I turned to Article 14. Article 14 was in the back third of the compact, wedged between Article 13's dispute resolution procedures and Article 15's annexes on data format standards. It was 2 pages. It looked, at first glance, like the kind of boilerplate that everyone assumes someone else has read. Most of the document's practical weight was front-loaded in Articles 1 through 10, which covered everything an inspecting party needed to know: how to file, what to ask for, how the response was structured. Article 14 was the housekeeping section. It was the kind of article that got skimmed. Article 14. Subsection A established that the compact applied symmetrically to all signatory parties. Article 14. Subsection B clarified that no party invoking Article 9 could claim exemption from its own obligations under the compact. Article 14. Subsection C stated that upon the filing of a formal disclosure demand under Article 9, the responding party acquired the right to file a reciprocal disclosure demand of equivalent scope against the inspecting party, to be answered within the same inspection window, on the same timeline, to the same documentation standard. The Sovhari had signed the compact 42 years ago. They had been the primary authors of it. Their signature and ratification record were in Annex 3 of the full text, which I had also read on that slow night shift. I sat with this for several minutes, doing nothing in particular except letting the full weight of what it said settle. Then I calmed Tomas Reyes and told him to pull every document covered under Article 9, all of it, not just the standard package. I told him I wanted it organized and cross-indexed by category, labeled clearly, with a summary sheet on top of each data case. I told him I wanted it ready by 800 Wednesday. He asked why we were being so thorough. Because when someone comes to inspect you, I said, the cleanest thing you can do is hand them everything they asked for before they have to ask twice, and have the rest ready in case they ask again. There was a pause on the comm. Are we expecting trouble? No, I said, I just want to be ready. I spent the rest of Tuesday evening rereading Article 14. The Sovhari Inspection Suite at Kethren 4 was a long rectangular room on the station's administrative level, gray composite walls, a long table with seating for 12, chairs upholstered in the station's standard charcoal fabric, a display screen at the far end, and 3 narrow windows looking out onto the docking corridor. The air processing unit in the corner hummed at a frequency that was just barely noticeable. The room smelled like recycled air, and the faint mineral ammonia undertone that Sovhari presence tends to leave in enclosed spaces, something the station's environmental systems processed down to a low hum rather than eliminating entirely. I arrived at 8:50, which gave me 10 minutes to arrange the documentation cases, pour coffee from the carafe, and review my notes. Tomas set up his terminal on my right. Preeti Anand settled in on my left with her transit ops system and a small thermos of tea she produced from her bag without ceremony. Velsaran arrived at 900 precisely, with 6 members of his delegation moving in the slightly synchronized gait that Sovhari inspection units develop after years of working together. He was tall, nearly 2.5 meters, with the smooth pale silver skin that Sovhari senior inspectors develop in middle age, and the paired articulated ridge structures above his eye sockets that Sovhari use for status signaling the way other species use rank insignia. His ridges were fully extended. He had dressed, in other words, for an audience with people who would be impressed by him. He looked at me across the table. I was wearing my standard cargo crew liaison coverall, which is the Navian gray station issue kind with the Kethren 4 patch on the left shoulder and the rank tab at the collar. I had a coffee. I had 3 data cases stacked neatly to my right. I did not have an extended ridge structure. Velsoron's ridges flexed slightly, a micro-adjustment I had read about in the Sovhari diplomatic briefing materials Van had forwarded, described there as recalibration of status assessment upon encountering a lower-than-expected rank counterpart. I noted it and did not react to it. "Liaison Vasquez," he said. His intercommon was precise and formally correct, with the Sovhari habit of placing stress a half-beat early on every third syllable. "On behalf of the Sovhari Inspection Directorate, we appreciate waystation Kethren 4's cooperation in this compliance inspection under Article 9 of the Kethren Transit Compact." "Thank you for coming," I said. "We've prepared the documentation set covered by your Article 9 demand. It's organized by category, transit logs, manifest records, capability documentation, and personnel deployment records. Each case has a summary sheet. We can walk you through the structure or leave you to work through it at your own pace." He looked at the 3 cases on the table, and then at the display screen, which Preeti had loaded with the digital version of the same materials. "That is comprehensive," he said. "You were specific in your request, so we tried to be specific in the response." I picked up my coffee. "Is there anything else you need to get started?" There was a pause. It was the particular kind of pause that follows a sentence when the speaker expected the response to take more room. Velsoron exchanged a look with the inspector to his immediate left, a younger Sovhari I mentally tagged as the second, whose formal name was Kethvaro, whose habit was to record everything of interest in a small rectangular notebook he kept in his breast pocket. The second opened his notebook and wrote something. "We will work through it ourselves," Velsoron said. "We may have questions." "Of course," I said. "We're here all day." The first day was uneventful. The Sovhari delegation worked through the transit logs for 4 hours, then the manifest records for 2 hours, then took a break during which they conferred quietly at the far end of the table and did not speak to us. Velsoron asked 3 questions over the course of the day. One about our manifest classification system, one about a weight discrepancy in a cargo entry that turned out to be a rounding convention difference between our system and theirs, and one about the formatting of our fuel reserve documentation. Tomas answered all 3. His answers were complete and documented. The second wrote in his notebook. I sat at the table, drank coffee, and read. I was reading a maintenance protocol manual for the atmospheric processor on the lower deck, which was due for its annual review, but I could also have been reading anything. The point was less the content than the posture, which was the posture of someone who is entirely comfortable with the proceedings and has no particular investment in their speed or direction. At 1700, just before close, Velsoron filed a supplemental request. He wanted an additional 12 months of transit records, a full breakdown of maintenance logs by system, and what he called expanded capability assessment materials. I read the request. It was, in practical terms, the move of someone who had gone through the first set of documentation and not found what he was looking for and was trying a different angle. The phrasing expanded capability assessment materials was doing some heavy lifting. It was not defined in the Compact's Article 9 annexes, which meant it was a soft request rather than a formal one, and what it meant in practice was, "We think you have something you're not showing us, and we'd like to see it." "We'll have the extended records ready by 900 tomorrow," I said. "For the capability assessment materials, it would help if you could be more specific about what you're looking for. We want to make sure we're giving you the right documentation." Velsoron's ridges moved again, a slightly different configuration this time, the one the briefing materials described as increased assessment engagement. He was paying more attention than he had been. "We are looking," he said carefully, "for documentation of any non-standard assets or capabilities operating in or through this corridor, anything not covered by your standard commercial operation filings. We'll review our files against that description tonight and bring anything applicable tomorrow," I said. He nodded. "That is acceptable." I walked back to my office after the session closed and sat at my desk for a moment. Then I calmed Van. "Day 1, I said. "No issues. They've submitted a supplemental request for extended records and expanded capability documentation." "What are they looking for?" "They're not sure," I said. "That's why they asked for expanded materials." I paused. "Sir, has the station's legal team reviewed the full text of the compact recently? All of it, I mean, not just Article 9. A pause. "Why?" "I want a second opinion on Article 14, specifically subsection C." A longer pause. "Vasquez." "Sir, what do you know that I don't?" "I know what the compact says," I said. "I just want legal confirmation before I act on it." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll flag it for Counsel Adiz tonight." "Thank you, sir." I went home, ate dinner, and read Article 14, subsection C 3 more times. Thursday was louder. I don't mean that anyone raised their voice. I mean that the silence in the inspection suite became a different kind of silence, the kind that has pressure behind it, that is doing work. The Sovhari delegation arrived at 900. We had the extended 12-month records ready, as promised, and a summary of our non-standard assets, which amounted to the following. An atmospheric processor on the lower deck that ran quieter than stock because our maintenance chief had replaced a worn bearing 18 months ago, and in the process had adjusted the harmonic buffer, and a cargo sorting algorithm that Preeti Anand had written herself from scratch 2 years ago, which was faster than the manufacturer default by a factor of about 1.4, and which had never been formally submitted to the compact's asset disclosure annexes, because it was a piece of software written by one analyst for an internal efficiency improvement, and had not previously occurred to anyone to classify as a declarable capability. I described both of these to Velsaran in detail. He looked at the documentation for the atmospheric processor. He looked at the documentation for the cargo algorithm. Then he looked at me. "These are," he said, "the sum of your non-standard assets." "For this waystation, yes," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "You are a commercial transit waystation." "Yes, sir." "And you have a quiet air processing unit and a faster sorting algorithm." "That's correct." His ridges retracted briefly and then extended again, which the briefing materials described as recognition of an insufficient hypothesis. Kethvaro wrote something in his notebook and then looked at it as if reconsidering. Velsaran turned to the extended transit records and spent the morning working through them. His questions in the afternoon session became more pointed, the way questions become when the person asking them is running through a mental checklist and crossing items off without finding the entry they expected. He asked about our communications protocols. He asked about our emergency response procedures. He asked about what he called non-standard operational relationships, any formal or informal arrangements with entities outside the commercial transit framework. Preeti answered the communications questions. Tomas answered the emergency response questions. For the non-standard operational relationships, I took the question myself. "We have a mutual aid agreement with Waystation Helios 7 and Waystation said released," I said. "Standard bilateral arrangements, emergency resource sharing, coordinated evacuation support if needed. Both are on file with the Transit Authority." I paused. "Is there a specific type of relationship you're looking to document? It would help us point you to the right records." Relationships with non-commercial vessels, Velsoran said. Military or government designations. Vessels not operating under commercial registry. We have some of those, I said. In the past 18 months, one survey ship, the Aldine, stopped for fuel and a maintenance check in March. Non-commercial registry but civilian scientific charter. One diplomatic courier in September, 4-hour stop, no records requests filed. One naval vessel in November, the Keswick, scheduled transit through the corridor, standard fuel stop, full manifest on file. I looked at Tomas. We'll pull the Keswick records for the full session. Velsoran's ridges shifted slightly. The Keswick was apparently an interesting entry. I had already looked up the Keswick's transit record that morning. It was a patrol vessel on a scheduled corridor rotation, publicly logged with the transit authority, nothing unusual. But I understood why the name caught his attention. Naval vessels always caught his attention. That was, I suspected, the thing he had come here looking for: evidence of military presence, concealed deployment, something that wasn't on the manifest. The Keswick's manifest was perfectly ordinary. We produced it within the hour. Velsoran spent the better part of the afternoon going through it. What the Keswick's records showed was one patrol vessel, standard armament configuration, standard crew complement, standard supply load, fuel purchased at Kethren 4 rates, minor hull seal maintenance on docking Arm 3, transit authority clearance filed 48 hours in advance, publicly logged, no anomalies. The kind of record that was boring by design, because the vessel and its mission were boring by design. A scheduled corridor rotation is not glamorous work. The Keswick's crew had eaten in our mess hall, used our repair facilities for a 2-hour maintenance check, and left on schedule. Velsoran went through it line by line. At 14:30, we took a short break. The Sovhari delegation gathered at the far end of the table and conducted a quiet, rapid-fire exchange among themselves that I did not try to follow. Kethvaro wrote several pages of notes in the time it took me to refill my coffee from the carafe and sit back down. During the break, Tomas leaned over and said quietly, "He's not finding what he came for." "No," I said. "Does that make things easier or harder?" I thought about it. "Easier in one direction," I said. "He's going to file a third supplemental request before close. When someone doesn't find what they're looking for, they ask for more." Tomas considered this, and the request will be improvised, I said. He'll ask for categories that aren't defined in the compact's annexes, things that don't have standard documentation formats. I picked up my coffee. We'll answer it the same way we've answered everything else. Completely, Tomas said. Completely. He nodded and went back to his terminal. Preeti, on my other side, had heard all of this and said nothing, which was her way of agreeing. When Velsoran called the afternoon session back to order, his questions had a slightly different quality to them. They were no longer the methodical checklist of the morning, but something more searching. He asked about our long-range sensor range and coverage, which I answered with the technical specifications from our installation documentation. He asked about our emergency communications protocols and who we contacted first in a station-level incident, which Preeti answered with the standard mutual aid tier structure. He asked twice whether we had any agreements with human military command that were not captured in our formal transit records, phrased slightly differently each time, the second version a bit more indirect than the first. All of our formal and informal relationships with external parties are documented in the records we've provided, I said. If there's a specific relationship or arrangement you have in mind, we're happy to look it up directly. He looked at me. No, he said, that won't be necessary. At 16:15, Velsoran filed a third supplemental request. This one asked for records of all communications between Kethren 4 and human military command structures, any documentation of scheduled visits by military assets in the coming 12 months, and what he called Allied Asset Coordination Records. I read the request twice. It was reaching. Allied Asset Coordination Records was not a category defined anywhere in the Compact's documentation standards. It was an improvised phrasing, which meant Velsaron was now asking for things he did not know the name of, hopping to catch something in the net. It was the kind of request that tells you more about the person filing it than about the station being inspected. It tells you they are convinced something exists, and they are willing to cast widely enough to find it even without knowing its shape. We'll review our files against this request tonight, I said. Some of these categories don't map directly to our filing structure, so it may take us until tomorrow morning. He nodded. That is acceptable. After the session closed, I walked back to my office and found Counsel Adie's memo waiting. It was 5 paragraphs. The language was careful in the way legal opinions are careful when the conclusion is solid but mildly remarkable. She had reviewed Article 14, all 3 subsections. She confirmed that subsection C was operative and unambiguous. She confirmed that the Sovhari's Article 9 filing had established the reciprocal right. She noted that the inspection window, defined in the Compact as the period beginning with the Article 9 filing and ending at close of business on the last scheduled inspection day, ran through 1800 Friday, and that any reciprocal demand filed before that time would fall within the window and would oblige the inspecting party to respond before the window closed. She had attached a Model 14C filing form, populated with placeholder language. At the bottom of the memo, in the margin, she had written by hand, "This has never been done to them before. That's worth knowing." I read the memo 3 times. Then I calmed Van. The call lasted 45 minutes. Van brought in Counsel Adie's and, after 20 minutes, patched in Commander Osai, who had stepped out of the Havari rerouting talks for what he called 15 minutes but became 30. I walked through Article 14C from the beginning. Adie's confirmed every point. I described what the Sovhari had been asking for over the past 2 days, the supplemental requests, the improvised categories, the Keswick fixation, and what a reciprocal demand would entitle us to ask for in return. Their transit logs for the past 18 months in the Kethren corridor system, their manifest records for all cargo, their capability documentation for inspection and military assets assigned to this corridor, and their personnel deployment records for the same period. Same window, same timeline, same documentation standard. Same 9 hours, from the start of the Friday session to close of window at 1800. There was a silence on the call that lasted several seconds. "Have the Sovhari ever received a reciprocal demand under 14C?" Commander Osai said. "Not from a human station," Adie said. "I ran the filing record. There are 2 prior instances, one from a Havari waystation 40 years ago, which the Sovhari disputed before the Compact Tribunal. They lost the dispute. One from a Sovhari logistics hub 12 years ago, which went to mediation and settled with a scope reduction." A pause. "No human station has ever tabled a 14C demand against the Sovhari." "Has any human station ever tried?" Osa said. "I don't believe it was known to be possible," Adie said carefully. "The Compact's Article 14 is not well indexed. It doesn't appear in the standard compliance briefing materials that most waystation liaisons work from." Another silence. "Vasquez," Commander Osai said, "you're the liaison on this. What's your read?" I had been turning it over since Tuesday afternoon, the shape of the thing, what it would mean to use it, and what it would mean not to. "Velsaron has been looking for something for 2 days," I said. "He's filed 3 supplemental requests. He's running improvised categories. He's fixated on the Keswick because it's the only vessel in our transit log that fits what he expects to find, and we both know the Keswick's manifest is clean." I paused. "By end of day Friday, he'll file his inspection report. He'll characterize our capabilities as adequate marginal, the way they always do, and he'll go home." 3 days of our staff's time and a stack of documentation, and the outcome is the same report they've filed 3 times before. Or, I said. Or we table the 14C demand first thing Friday morning, I said, before he can open the day's session. At that point the inspection inverts. We have a valid demand, filed within the window, and he has until 1800 to respond. That's 9 hours for a Sovhari Inspection Bureau to produce 18 months of capability documentation on a format they've never had to supply before. To a commercial waystation, Adiz observed. Yes, I said, which is its own message. Osei was quiet for a moment. What's the risk? Van asked. Diplomatic friction, I said. The Sovhari will not like it. Velsoron specifically will not like it. It may affect the tone of inspections going forward. May affect the tone, Osei repeated. Or it may affect the substance, I said. If the Directorate has to acknowledge that 14C is operative and symmetric, that's on the record for every future inspection. Every human waystation that gets a disclosure demand going forward has the same right we have right now. They just need to know it exists. There was a pause. File it, Osei said. First thing Friday, clean language, proper form, nothing extra, and Vasquez, stay calm in there. Yes, sir. I mean it. Don't gloat, don't lecture, don't explain more than you need to. Just table the demand and wait. Understood. I spent Thursday evening drafting the 14C demand. The model form Adiz had sent gave me the structural skeleton, the standard compact filing header, the identification fields, the clause reference block. I populated it carefully, section by section. The scope I mirrored exactly to Velsoron's Article 9 demand, word for word where I could, equivalent phrasing where the mirroring would have been too literal. The timeline I set per the compact's window provisions, citing the specific paragraph in Article 14C that established the close of window deadline. The documentation standard I referenced per Annex 6, which was the same annex the Sovhari had cited in their own demand. I used plain language throughout. No flourishes. Nothing that reached beyond what the article entitled us to ask for. Nothing that could be read as aggressive or inflammatory. The demand was factual. We were citing a right, specifying its scope and giving the required notice. That was all it needed to do. The hardest part was the scope specification, getting it right so it was genuinely equivalent to their demand and not overstated. I went back to Velsoron's Article 9 filing 3 times, checking each category against the corresponding category in my draft. Transit logs, mirrored. Manifest records, mirrored. Capability documentation, mirrored, with the Sovhari equivalent of station assets being their corridor inspection and military assets, which I defined by reference to the compact's own asset classification definitions in Annex 2. Personnel deployment records, mirrored. It was, when I finished, 4 pages and a cover sheet. The cover sheet had the filing date, the parties, the article reference, and a single sentence of purpose. This reciprocal disclosure demand is filed pursuant to Article 14, subsection C of the Kethren Transit Compact, in response to the Article 9 demand filed by the Sovhari Inspection Directorate on date. Tomas came by at 2000 and proofread the transit log section, flagging a formatting inconsistency in how I'd cited the annex reference. I fixed it. Preeti stayed late to review the manifest records clause and confirmed the documentation standard language was correctly parallel to the Sovhari original. At 22:30, I sent the draft to Counsel Adiz with a note asking her to confirm the legal form was correct and the filing timing was valid. She sent it back at 23:18 with 2 small corrections, one to the Article 14C citation format, one to the window close timestamp which I had written as end of business, but which the compact defined more precisely as 1800 station local time on the final scheduled inspection day. The corrections were minor. At the bottom of her return message she had written, "This is clean. File it first thing Friday. Don't wait." I went to sleep at midnight. I was up at 600, which is earlier than I usually start. I made coffee, looked over the demand one more time, made no changes, and filed it in the compact registry at 7:47. The system generated a confirmation number immediately and queued the transmission receipts. I waited while the system pinged each of the 3 required addresses: the Sovhari vessel's registered COM address, the Directorate's central filing office, and the compact registry's public record. All 3 confirmed within 8 minutes. I printed the confirmation page and put it in my folder. Then I opened my coffee and went to collect Tomas and Preeti. Then I poured my coffee, collected Tomas and Preeti, and walked down to the inspection suite. The Sovhari delegation was already seated when we arrived at 900. Velsoran had his documentation terminal open on the table in front of him. Kethren had his notebook out. The other 5 inspectors had the organized, slightly restless air of people in the final stretch of a known procedure. Everyone knows how the day goes. Everyone is already mentally on the other side of it. I put a printed document on the table in front of Velsoran and one in front of Kethren. "Good morning," I said. I sat down, poured coffee. "Before we begin today's session, I wanted to give you a courtesy notification." I set my own copy of the document on the table. At 7:47 this morning, Waystation Kethren 4 filed a reciprocal disclosure demand under Article 14, subsection C of the Kethren Transit Compact. A copy has been transmitted to your vessel's registered communications address, to the Sovhari Inspection Directorate's filing office, and to the Transit Compact Registry. The filing confirmation number is on page 2. Velsoran picked up the document. He did not read it the way you read something you anticipated. He read it the way you read something that has arrived from a direction you were not watching. His ridges retracted slightly, then held. Kethren did not open his notebook. I let him read. He turned to page 2. He read the filing confirmation number, the registry timestamp, the transmission receipts. He turned to page 3, which was the demand itself, structured in clean parallel to his own Article 9 demand, asking for Sovhari transit logs for the past 18 months in the Kethren corridor system, manifest records for all commercial and non-commercial cargo passing through Sovhari-administered corridor segments, capability documentation for all Sovhari inspection and military assets assigned to this corridor, and personnel deployment records for their inspection bureau for the same period. Same window, same timeline, same standard. He put the document down. "This is," he stopped. "Article 14, subsection C," I said. "Page 4 has the operative text. The demand is scoped to the same 18-month window and the same documentation standard as your Article 9 demand. Per the Compact's inspection window provisions, response is due within the current window, which closes today at 1800. I paused. "That gives you approximately 9 hours. Velsoran looked at the document. He looked at me. He looked at the document again. His ridges moved through a configuration I had not seen from him before: slow, partial extension, held for 2 or 3 seconds, then smoothed. Kethren watched him and wrote nothing. "The compact," Velsoran said carefully, "has not historically been applied in this manner." "I understand that," I said. "To be completely clear, we're not disputing the legitimacy of your inspection. Everything we've provided over the past 2 days is accurate and complete, and we're ready to continue today's session as scheduled. We're simply exercising the right that the compact gives us. It's in Article 14. I picked up my coffee. "We thought you'd want to know about the filing before we got into today's records." There was a silence that occupied the room in the way that particular silences do, not empty, but full of people deciding what to say next. The delegation at the far end of the table exchanged looks. Two of the junior inspectors leaned close to each other and spoke very quietly in Sovhari, which I understood just enough of to catch the word for reciprocal, and the word for clause, and the word for applicable. Velsoran turned to Kethvaro. They held a brief exchange in Sovhari that was too fast and too quiet for me to follow. Then Velsoran turned back. "We will need to consult with our vessel," he said. "Of course," I said. "Take whatever time you need. The suite is yours." I looked at Tomas and Preeti. "We'll be right outside." We were in the corridor for 51 minutes. Tomas drank his coffee. Preeti worked through something on her terminal, the maintenance review I hadn't finished on Tuesday, which she'd taken on without being asked, because Preeti is that kind of analyst. I leaned against the wall and read a systems management report that had been sitting in my queue since Monday. 3 times during those 51 minutes, I heard voices from inside the inspection suite, brief, low, controlled. Sovhari deliberation style tends toward the quiet even in disagreement. They confer rather than argue. The fact that I could hear them through a sealed composite door at all was informative. They were working through something that was costing them effort. I thought about what Velsoran was working through. He had come here with a framework. The Article 9 inspection was a procedure he had run 31 times. File the demand, receive the documentation, review it, conclude. The document flow was one way. The initiative was his. The shape of the thing was fixed. What the 14C filing had done was not challenge that framework. It had not disputed his inspection or questioned his authority or made any of it adversarial. It had simply handed him a second document that said, "The room has 2 parties in it and both of them have rights here." That was all. But the second document made the next 9 hours look fundamentally different from the previous 31 inspections, and I understood that Velsoran was in there right now working through what that difference meant in practical terms. What it meant for the documentation his bureau could produce on 9 hours' notice, what it meant for the sensitive personnel records, what it meant for the proprietary data formats, and what it meant that a cargo crew liaison at a commercial waystation had read far enough into the compact to find the clause he had apparently never thought about. At 9:58, the door opened, and one of the junior inspectors, not Kethvaro, one of the 5 who had barely spoken over 3 days, came out and asked if we could provide a printed copy of the full Article 14 text in the compact's official standard Sovhari translation. "We have the certified translation on file," Tomas said. He produced it from the documentation folder he'd been carrying all morning. He had packed it there before we left the office, which I noted and did not comment on. The junior inspector looked at the document, looked at Tomas, looked at the document again with an expression I would describe as running the arithmetic, and went back inside without saying anything further. At 10:23, one of the comm units inside the suite activated. I heard a brief exchange, the Sovhari vessel's voice, then Velsoran's. I couldn't hear the content. I didn't need to. At 10:34, the door opened again, and Velsoran came out alone. At 10:34, the door opened again and Velsoran came out alone. His ridges were fully flat, the neutral position, no display in either direction. He stood in the corridor and looked at me for a moment. "Liaison Vasquez," he said. "Inspector, I want to be direct with you. Please." He chose his words with a specific deliberateness. That means the speaker is not accustomed to being in the position of having to choose carefully. "The Sovhari Inspection Directorate has operated under the Kethren Transit Compact for 42 years, he said. In that time, we have conducted 31 inspections under Article 9. In none of those 31 inspections has a responding party filed a 14C reciprocal demand." "I gathered that," I said. "The documentation we would be required to produce." He stopped. "Our corridor capability records are maintained in a proprietary format that would require significant conversion to meet the compact's data standard. Our transit logs for the Kethren segment are archived on our vessel under our Bureau's internal classification system. Our personnel deployment records include information that the Directorate considers operationally sensitive. He paused. This was not anticipated. I nodded. 9 hours, he said, is not a sufficient production timeline for that volume of documentation. I understand the difficulty, I said. The compact doesn't provide for extension requests within the inspection window, but we're not in a rush. He looked at me. There was something working behind his eyes, a kind of recalculation, the kind that takes a situation you thought you understood and turns it over to look at the underside. The station's full compliance over the past 3 days, he said slowly. Every document, same-day delivery, the extended records ready before we asked for them formally. He paused. You had read Article 14 before we arrived. Yes, I said. When? 6 months ago, I said. Night shift, slow night. He was quiet for a moment. You read the entire compact, he said. It was the longest document in the reference archive that I hadn't read yet. He absorbed this. His ridges did a small movement, partial extension, held briefly, then neutral. I had looked it up after the first time I'd seen it. In Sovhari nonverbal register, that pattern means acknowledgement of an adversarial position that has been correctly played. It is not quite respect, which the Sovhari reserve for a different configuration. It is the thing that comes before respect, the thing that makes it possible. What would it take, he said carefully, to resolve this in a way that was workable for both parties? I had thought about this. We're a commercial waystation, I said. We don't need your classified capability records. We don't need your personnel deployment files. We have no practical use for them. The 14C demand establishes a principle, not an intelligence operation. I picked up my coffee. What the demand establishes is that the compact is symmetric, that an Article 9 filing is not a one-way instrument. If the Directorate wants to formalize that understanding, acknowledge, in the inspection report, that 14C is operative and applicable in both directions. For this inspection and going forward, we could narrow our records request to your public transit logs and non-sensitive commercial manifest data. Items you could produce today without difficulty. Velsoron listened to this without interrupting, which was the first time in 3 days he had done that with anything I said. In exchange, he said, the Directorate formally acknowledges the symmetry of the compact. In the inspection report, on record with the compact registry, so that every future inspection under Article 9, every human waystation that receives a disclosure demand, has the same right clearly documented. He was quiet. The Directorate would need to review this with our legal counsel, he said. Of course. Several hours. We'll be in the suite, I said. He looked at me once more, the expression I had come to recognize, the one that was still recalibrating. Liaison Vasquez, he said, you are a cargo crew liaison. Yes, sir. This station's senior staff are engaged elsewhere. Yes, sir. He did not say what he was thinking. He went back into the suite. I ate lunch in the corridor. Tomas came back from the mess hall with sandwiches, which he distributed without ceremony. The station variety are unremarkable, a dense grain flatbread with protein and reconstituted greens, but filling. Preeti ate at her terminal. I ate leaning against the wall with my back to the inspection suite door, which is not a dignified posture, but the corridor chairs are designed for waiting rooms, and I had been sitting in them since 900. At 11:04, I heard a comm unit activate inside the suite. At 11:42, I heard it again, shorter. At 12:18, the door opened, and one of the junior inspectors came out and asked if we could confirm the exact filing timestamp on the 14C demand. 7:47, Tomas said. He had the confirmation receipt in his folder. He handed it over. The junior inspector photographed it with a personal device and went back inside. I finished my sandwich. Tomas had brought back 3 sandwiches and a container of the station's standard issue soup, which I had not asked for. He set the soup on the small side table by the corridor chairs without comment. It was the kind of thing you do when you understand that someone is going to be standing in a corridor for a long time and should probably eat a complete meal. I ate the soup. At 12:51, Velsoran came out with Kethvaro. Kethvaro opened his notebook. "We have a proposal," Velsoran said. The proposal was what I had outlined in its essentials. Kethren 4 would narrow its 14C records request to public transit logs and non-sensitive commercial manifest data. Items the Sovhari delegation could produce from documentation already on hand, without the classified capability records or the personnel files or the proprietary data format conversion problem. The Sovhari Inspection Directorate would formally acknowledge in the inspection report that Article 14, subsection C, was operative and applicable symmetrically, and would include a notation that this acknowledgement established precedent applicable to all future compact inspections involving human waystation parties. In exchange, the Sovhari delegation would deliver their response to the narrowed demand by 1600. The inspection would close on schedule. Both parties would sign the report. Kethvaro wrote steadily while Velsoran spoke. When Velsoran finished, Kethvaro looked up, not at me but at his notebook, checking something. I read through the proposal terms twice. "One addition," I said. "The acknowledgement of symmetry should reference this specific filing, that the 14C demand was filed within the proper inspection window, in correct form, and was fully valid under the compact's provisions. I want the filing record unambiguous, so there's no basis for a subsequent dispute about whether the demand was procedurally sound." Velsoran looked at Kethvaro. Kethvaro made a small notation and looked up. "Agreed," Velsoran said. "Then we have an agreement," I said. We completed the Sovhari binding acknowledgement, a brief formal forearm contact, index finger extended, which I had looked up in their protocol manual the evening before. The manual described it as a binding acknowledgement between parties of equivalent standing. I noted that language and did not say anything about it. The Sovhari delivered their narrowed 14C response at 15:37, 2 hours and 23 minutes before close. It was orderly and more complete than I had expected. Velsoran had not been understating the proprietary format difficulty. The transit logs had clearly been converted by someone working quickly and competently, and several column headers were in a Sovhari administrative dialect I had to cross-reference against the translation database. The manifest summaries were in a slightly non-standard layout but readable. It was the work of a delegation that had spent 4 hours producing something they had never produced before for a party they had not expected to ask for it, and they had done it correctly. Tomas went through it methodically, while Preeti filed our acknowledgement of receipt. I reviewed the acknowledgement language in Velsoran's draft inspection report. It said, in the careful official prose of compact standard reporting format, that Waystation Kethren 4 had demonstrated full compliance with the Article 9 disclosure demand, that all requested documentation had been provided within the required timelines, and that during the course of the inspection, the responding party had validly exercised its right under Article 14, subsection C, to file a reciprocal disclosure demand of equivalent scope. It confirmed that this right was operative and applicable, and that the symmetry of the compact's disclosure provisions was formally recognized by the Sovhari Inspection Directorate. It noted that this recognition established precedent applicable to future inspections involving human waystation parties. There was a footnote. The footnote stated that the acknowledgement superseded the Directorate's previous operational interpretation of Article 14, under which reciprocal demands had been considered inapplicable in practice. I sat with the footnote for a moment. What it said, in the oblique official language of compact reporting, was, we had a rule we applied for 42 years, and we applied it as though it only worked in one direction, and this waystation and its cargo crew liaison pointed out that it didn't. The footnote was the Directorate's way of filing that correction in a format that would exist in the compact registry for as long as the compact was in force. Any Sovhari inspection team that pulled the Kethren 4 precedent report in the future would read that footnote before they filed their next Article 9 demand. Any human waystation liaison who read the precedent file would know what Article 14C was and what it was for. I signed the report. The Sovhari delegation departed at 800 Saturday morning. The docking arm smelled like the usual Saturday, cooler than the rest of the station, residual cargo processing dust in the air, the distant hum of the transitop systems running their morning diagnostics. The big haulers would come through Monday, and the arm would be busy again. Saturday morning was quiet in the particular way that spaces are quiet when they are between one thing and the next. I was on the arm checking the docking seal log when Velsoran came over. He had left his delegation loading equipment on their vessel and came alone, which I had not expected. Liaison Vasquez. Inspector, safe travels. He stood beside me for a moment, looking at the docking corridor. I am going to say something to you that I would not say in the inspection suite, he said. All right. I came here expecting this inspection to proceed the way our previous 31 proceeded. File a demand, receive documentation, review it, file a report. He paused. I came here specifically because we had information, indirect, low confidence but persistent, suggesting that human activity in this corridor had expanded beyond what the public transit record showed. And you found that it hadn't, I said. We found that it hadn't. He was quiet for a moment. Or we found documentation consistent with it not having done so, which is not precisely the same thing, but it is what the record shows. He looked at the corridor. You gave us everything we asked for, same day, in correct form, organized clearly. You provided extended materials before we asked for them formally. You answered every question completely. Yes, sir. And then, he said, you filed a reciprocal demand that none of our previous 31 counterparts had ever filed. Yes, sir. He turned to look at me. Is there anything here, he said, that we would have found if we had looked differently? I thought about it honestly. No, I said. We're a commercial waystation, 30 staff, a 5-person emergency response team with standard equipment, a mutual aid agreement with 2 neighboring stations, a cargo sorting algorithm that Preeti wrote herself that's faster than the manufacturer default. I paused. That's what we have. And yet, he said, you had read the entire compact. 6 months ago, I said, slow night shift, I read everything in the archive eventually. He made a sound I had not heard from him before, a brief controlled exhalation through his nasal ridge, quiet, dry. The Sovhari approximation of a dry laugh, which I had read about in the briefing materials but not encountered in person. It was not performed for my benefit. It was the involuntary kind. The next inspection, he said, will be conducted differently. I'd expect so, I said. He held out his forearm, I met it. Then he walked back to his delegation, and I walked back inside, and the docking arm sealed behind me. I filed my liaison report that afternoon. It ran 9 pages, which is long for what had officially been a routine compliance inspection. I wrote it straight, what the demand said and when it arrived, what documentation we produced and on what timeline, what each supplemental request asked for and how we answered it, when and why the 14C demand was filed, how the corridor negotiation went, what the Sovhari acknowledged in the final report. I included the timeline of every document transfer, every filing timestamp, every question and answer. I attached Counsel Adi's memo, the full 14C demand, the filing confirmations, the Sovhari's narrowed response, and the inspection report with the footnote. I wrote it the way I had written every document in the past 3 days, complete, organized, in correct form. I was under no illusions that the report would be read quickly. Reports from junior liaisons at commercial way stations do not tend to move fast through queues, but I wanted the record to be unambiguous when it did get read. I had learned, over 3 days of watching someone look hard for something that wasn't there, that an unambiguous record is its own kind of capability. I sent it to Van. He read it in about 20 minutes. I estimated this from the fact that he calmed me 22 minutes after I sent it, with the tone he uses when he has finished reading something and is deciding what to do about it. "Vasquez," he said. "Sir." "The footnote." "Yes, sir." "The footnote says," he said slowly, "that the Sovhari are officially acknowledging that 14C applies symmetrically, and that this sets precedent for all future human way station inspections." "Yes, sir." A long pause. "You did this," he said, "because you read the compact on a slow night shift." "I did it because Article 14 was there," I said. "I just read far enough to find it." There was a pause of a slightly different kind. The kind that means the person on the other end is recalibrating their sense of what kind of conversation they thought they were having. "Every way station operating under the compact has had this right for 42 years, Van said. "Yes, sir." "And no one used it." "No, sir." "Because no one read Article 14. Or they read it and didn't see the application," I said. "The compact is long. Article 14 comes after the main working sections. It doesn't announce itself." He was quiet for a moment. The Sovhari knew it was there. "They wrote it," I said, "but I think they wrote it as a formality, a symmetry provision for the sake of having one, with the practical understanding that no one on the other side would ever actually use it. A right that exists on paper but has never been exercised tends to stop feeling like a right. It starts feeling like a footnote." Another pause. "Until someone reads the footnote," Van said. "Yes, sir." He was quiet again, longer this time. "I'm sending this to Commander Osai," he said. "He was in the call Thursday night, sir." "I'm sending it anyway," Van said, "and to the Transit Compact office, and to the Diplomatic Relations Bureau. They'll want to know about the precedent." He paused. "Well done, Vasquez." He ended the call. I sat at my desk for a moment, listening to the station around me. The environmental system running its constant background hum. The distant sound of a docking arm seal cycling on the far end of the arm. The station was quiet the way it was quiet on Saturday afternoons when the week's traffic had moved through and nothing was coming until Monday. I thought about the footnote, not because it made me proud, particularly. It was one paragraph in a report that would go into a registry file and sit there, probably, for years before anyone read it in a context that made it matter. But it was in the record. It was unambiguous, and it was in the record. And when the next inspection came to the next way station under the compact, the footnote would be there to be found by anyone who looked. The same way Article 14C had been there, for 42 years, waiting for someone to read far enough. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday, slow, nothing in the queue, second cup of coffee just poured, Van stopped by my console. "The Transit Compact office sent a commendation," he said. He set a data chip on the desk, "for the Kethren 4 inspection handling." I looked at the chip. "For reading the document," I said. He picked up his coffee and looked out the window at the empty docking arm. "Apparently," he said, "that's not as common as you'd think." He left. I put the chip in my desk drawer and went back to work.